Welcome to The Pool. I'm your host, Philip McKenzie. I'm the Executive Director of AdvancingDiversity.org, which lives as part of the Media Village platform. The Pool is a direct challenge to the flawed notion that the available diverse talent pool is either shallow or non-existent. Each episode of The Pool is an opportunity to engage with and hear from diverse thought leaders in advertising, marketing, media, and beyond. The pool is deeper than you ever thought. All you have to do is jump in. On this episode of The Pool, my guest is Glenda Villanueva-Marchetta, Multicultural Lead for A4. In 2019, she was responsible for launching a Multicultural Center of Excellence and delivered a multicultural national sales strategy for A4. This is someone who, if I spent the time reading her full bio and all the things she's done within the industry, I would use all of our available time to do that. So I gave just a little bit of a snapshot because Glenda is someone who has experienced a wide variety of what it truly means to be a leader within the multicultural space. I want to give a heartfelt welcome to Glenda. Thanks so much for being on The Pool.
And thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of the conversation.
And, you know, we've had the opportunity now to talk a few times before coming on the show, though we weren't specifically talking about the show. But, I do want to give you an opportunity to, share a bit of your journey within the industry, because I think there's so much to learn about how you've traversed being a woman, being Latina within the advertising and marketing industries. And there's a lot of lessons that you've experienced just by having so much experience that I think is an important thing to share with our listeners.
Sure. So I was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and moved to New York when I was about 5 years old, raised on Long Island by my Puerto Rican father and my Ecuadorian mother. I consider myself an expert in ceviche and pasteles. So growing up as an only child, I attended school and did not speak a word of English. So my early childhood experiences, I think, also shaped who I am today, right? I'm a very social animal, so not being able to communicate and make friends immediately was a space that I wasn't comfortable in. But when you're that age, you pick up language very easily. Language comes to you much faster than when you're older. And I was the only kid in school who did not speak English, and no one in school spoke Spanish. And that's changed a lot today, right? We're talking about the 70s at the time. The Hispanic population in New York was probably around maybe 7-8%, And so my parents had made a choice to move to an area where, education is paramount in my family. So they wanted me to go to a good school, et cetera. By the time I graduated high school, there were probably about 20 other Hispanic families in my high school. And I've always had this thirst for knowledge in terms of language and different cultures and foods, et cetera. And so in high school, I took about 2 years of French and about 2 years of Italian. And then later on in college, I took 1 year of Latin, which just beat the heck out of me. That was tough. But by the time I went to college, I went to St. John's University in Queens. And you know how diverse Queens is. I stopped trying to blend in, fit in, because that's kind of what happens to immigrants. When you first come here, you don't want to stick out, especially as a young kid. And so by the time I went to college, I started accepting my Hispanicity, my culture, my roots, and kind of embraced that, and met other people like me that spoke my language, and other friends whose mothers cooked like my mom and who ate the same foods, and had family reunions like we do. So I started to embrace my difference. And it wasn't until about my junior year in college when SBS launched the first FM Spanish radio station that it clicked. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in Spanish language media. And I was my major at St. John's was communication. So everything just kind of fit together. My background, my culture, my language, my experiences in languages, and my education. And so I pursued a career in Spanish language media. So I started working at Interrep. I didn't take the job at SBS because Interrep at the time offered additional training, which I knew was going to be important, and knowledge of general market, not just the Hispanic market. So I took that first job there, and it was really the fact that I spoke two languages that helped propel my career, a lot quicker. So Interrep, McGavran Guild, formed a joint venture with Caballero Spanish Media, and anyone in the Hispanic market knows who Caballero is. And so I ran the joint venture between the two companies, and served as director for the joint venture. I think at the time I was like 26. So young, female, Hispanic, etc. But I definitely, I used my experiences once I got married. I always say my hyphenated life shaped who I am also. My husband is Italian American. And so it's kind of a fun household, and it's been kind of fun raising our kids. But I also look at my kids and their friends and our extended family. And I love that we have this very diversified group of friends and extended family. And that also helps shape us professionally, I think.
And, I love how the conversation kind of starts with this acknowledgement of the importance of culture, but yet for a while, particularly in those early years, it seemed as if the culture was something that you couldn't fully bring yourself into these experiences. And now, as our demographics change, as our culture, our social culture changes, it seems like there is more of an opportunity to bring our whole selves into our work, and that culture is becoming more important. So I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on that as it pertains to, the work you've done as a multicultural lead.
So the opportunity to identify a need really came because of my background. So we were very focused on, obviously, our digital assets, right? And our strength lies in the fact that we have ISP, IP addressability. And so we were looking at it from a very general market standpoint. And so I identified, why are we not focusing more on multicultural audiences if the growth of the population is here? And at the time when I raised this question, I was given the opportunity to, run with it. You're going to go into the product team. You're going to sit with the product team and make sure that we have the right assets in place, the right partnerships in place. And so I did a deep dive into all of our assets, and I did that for about a year and developed products to serve, products to offer for our advertisers. So, and that really came as a result of my past experiences and my diversified background. Also the experience in raising 3 Gen Z daughters, right? And looking at how they view culture, how they navigate language, how they make decisions, right? Their decisions many times are based on the influences of culture, right? The way they were raised, the way I was raised, the way my husband was raised. So I took this opportunity and I was placed on the product team in our tech division, which is kind of funny if you think about it, because I'm not a very technical person. I saw something because of my culture that someone else did not see. So I think that was valuable.
And another thing that comes to mind when you talk about that journey is this idea of targeting. This drilling down to really get to the essence of communities. Sometimes particularly in a data-driven world, the targeting misses the culture. And it sounds like you've been able to incorporate the culture so it's not missed even as we drill down.
So I can't help that the Census Bureau puts us under three buckets, right? You've got Hispanic, Black, Asian, and we are not Hispanics. Neither Blacks or Asians are one monolithic group. Within the Asian community, you've got over 40 different countries. Within the Black community, you've got as much variation. People who are Hispanic Black, people who are Caribbean Black, people who are directly from Africa, few people who are African American. And in the Hispanic bucket, you also have over 20 different countries. So there's nuances to each country and how we perceive, let's say, politics. And a perfect example is what happened in the election recently. So the Democratic Party, the message didn't resonate in a socially conservative border communities, along the borders of Arizona and of Texas. And those communities are very fearful of COVID and shutdowns and loss of well-paid oil industry jobs. So the messaging didn't resonate there. So people were surprised to see that so many votes went red instead of blue. And in Miami, we saw what happened in Dade County, right? Dade County is recognized as the capital of Latin America, and it's predominantly Cuban. And the Cuban population is also a conservative group. So there you saw the Republican Party messaging a group within a group. And then if you drill down even further and you look at not just the subgroups, but also the generation of Gen Zs. Gen Zs tend to be more liberal in their views, and you have about 1 million Gen Zs every year turning age 18, a very diversified demographic. And so those Gen Zers, although they're raised conservatively, may have different views than their parents. So I found the election to be fascinating from the viewpoint of what made you decide to vote for which candidate. I don't really care as much as who you voted for, but I want to know what drove those decisions. And I think that both parties could have done a much better job at understanding that it's not just a Spanish language message for Hispanics. It has to be relevant, culturally relevant, and in the proper language, and address the issues that matter to each generation within those groups.
And it's interesting that you kind of bring up the specific focus on the Latino market, because I think that's a good place for us to spend, a little bit more time, in the sense that, I'm sure you've seen in the same way I've seen that, all the available numbers are out there for, a general shift in a browning, if you want to call it, of America. That includes a huge focus on the Latino market. There's tons of reports on the spending power and the cultural influence of these communities. But yet, year after year, there's still underrepresentation. There's still a lack of, really doing that hard work that you just described in a political context. It's not done in a marketing and advertising context, right? It's still just, it appears to still live very much on the surface. Like, how do you think we will, or what do you think will get us to the point where we start to really do this heavy lifting culture work to be more effective in marketing and advertising as it pertains to the Latino community?
I think that I actually feel very optimistic in some of the conversations that I've been hearing, some of the conferences that I've been attending. There is a call, not just by the Hispanic community, but by all minority communities to say, hey, I'm here, I matter. And advertisers are taking a look at targeting these segments. For the first time ever, I feel like during this crisis, usually when you're looking at multicultural budgets from brands, it's typically the first budget to go. It's not, in the past, it hasn't been looked at as, the core budget, part of the core budget. It's the extra budget. And this time around, I don't I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing more new players entering multicultural space. And I think it's a combination of what's happened in this past year, right? So let's take a look at 2020 in review. In order to project what's going to happen in the future, we got to look a little bit in the past. So 2020 has been a year of so many firsts and extremely impactful moments. And I think I feel like it's going to be the catapult to quantifiable change on so many fronts. So to begin with, and we probably forgot about the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl in 2020 was played in, again, Miami in Dade County, and we know the stats there. It's identified as the capital of Latin America, over 70% Hispanic, a very bilingual community. And so it was played there. You had 3 Latinas that were selected because of who they represent, right? You had Demi Lovato, Mexican American. You had Jennifer Lopez, Puerto Rican. You had Shakira, Colombian Lebanese American. And these 3 women, also 2 of them are on Forbes' highest paid entertainers, on the list of highest paid entertainers.
They definitely have that bank account.
They're powerhouses, right? So the bank account, and I think the influence they have. So when I watched the Super Bowl, there was such cultural influence, and this has been happening for the last decade, right? This isn't like it just happened overnight. I think that the Hispanic community went from being the Hispanic population went from being influenced, trying to blend in, right, as I did as a child, to now being the influencers. And you see this influence, and I feel like you saw it all culminate at the Super Bowl, where at the biggest American spectator sport, it had such a Latin flair. As a matter of fact, some of the chefs that they had at the Coliseum were of Hispanic heritage, and they were serving foods that were very Latin. And if you look at the owners of the Miami Dolphins, the minority owners are Mark Anthony, the Estefans, and you felt the influence of culture there, So that was a change in the early 2020. And then we went into the pandemic, right? 6 weeks after that.
Yeah.
And the pandemic, boy, it just changed everything everything for everyone, right? And it's touched affected so many lives in a negative way, in a positive way. But because of COVID, we also saw virtual as the new norm. You saw the acceleration of virtual medicine, virtual classrooms, virtual office space, new fashion trends with face masks. And, for the first time, we all had to buckle down and stay home. And then you're also seeing a big change in media habits, right? OTT was growing, but I think that OTT and digital the growth has been catapulted because of COVID, because we all
absolutely
right. So we're all home and we're all on social media and watching TV, and then you see the tragic death of George Floyd, right? How could that not touch you? How could that not make you want to take action?
Yeah.
And we see the BLM movement, and I feel like people were paying more attention because of the shutdown. People were home more, and the conversations were taking place. And so that spun us again. And I also feel like that you had, for the first time, solidarity behind a movement. You had different minority groups coming together. So that was something positive out of something negative.
And there's real also demand for accountability.
Yes,
I think,
more than ever.
As we think about how diversity is playing out, as in the world in terms of the work that we all do in advertising and marketing, but then we're also seeing internally organizations are being held to account for the things that we've kind of talked about, right? Like it's no longer enough for you to give, kind of lip service to, to issues of diversity or to culture. And, like you very astutely mentioned a few minutes ago, it was for a long time, the multicultural bucket of budget was smaller.
Mhm.
It was the first to go. If there were going to be cuts to be made, that's where the cuts were going to come from. And it didn't make sense on a lot of levels, because if the influence, if the power of what's driving culture is coming from these multicultural audiences, you should be spending more money there, right? And now maybe there's a chance to shift that.
I think that the BLM movement, and also I should go back and mention that, remember, 2020 is a census year, right?
Yeah.
In the background, you have all these releases of numbers, and you're seeing in the under 18 demographic, the country is now a minority majority. First time ever. That's another first in 2020. So, and we're recognizing that the minority population represents 40% of the population. So you've got all these conversations going on in the background, and this movement happens, and we're recognizing that not in a too far future, our country will be minority majority,
Absolutely.
all demographics. And this is happening from birth rates, not necessarily immigration rates. With the Hispanic community, 9 out of 10 Gen Zs are born here in the US. And when you look at the projected birth rates over the next 5 years, it's actually negative 60,000 for non-Hispanic whites, and Black, Asian, and Hispanics will account for over 2.5 million per year, right? So as a marketer, how are you not paying attention? So we also saw that with the movement, you had certain brands, and I'm going to call out P&G because I feel like they always do the right thing, but you had brands also backing up the movement, right? So now it wasn't just about advertising, but it was also, you're seeing brands take a stand for the first time. I really haven't seen that in the past. So that's encouraging, first. And it's not just one brand I've seen, many brands that have shifted their messaging, that have pivoted their messaging. And, as when I watch TV, when I listen to ads, and I'm seeing more new ads coming on targeting multicultural consumers. And I see representation on some of the commercials, on TV commercials, more than I have in the past. So I feel like that change is, you're right, it's been slow to come. It's been slow to happen, but I feel like the BLM movement went from, hey, I'm here poking people, to actually shaking people and being recognized.
Yeah. And as we think about 2021, how do we keep this momentum going? Like, what are like one or two things that you're kind of going to be focusing on, or thinking about as we head into the new year? Obviously you're in ground zero. You're in a organization focused on these issues. You're taking the lead. You have a wealth of experience, both professional and lived experience. So, we want to hear from someone like yourself as to what you're thinking about for your 2021.
So 2021, again, 2021 is going to be based off all the changes and firsts that we've seen in 2020, right? Taking the natural disasters, the virtual reality that we live in, the MLB World Series, that took place with only 25% capacity at the stadium. The rest all virtual, right? And another first is the Marlins announced first female general manager, and she's Asian. So all of these firsts will be impacting 2021. And I feel that the future will start with a review of 2020, and there'll be the shift in demography once the census comes out is going to be more of an eye opener. It already is, and I think that will continue. And I think that the future looks very multicultural. I think it looks very digital. And I think we will recognize that America is more of a stew than a melting pot. In the past, we were absorbed into the American culture, and now we are influencing culture. So I like to think that we are more of a stew with, individual flavors going in. And so I also think that Gen Zs. This is the first generation that will be made up mostly of minorities, but we will see this continued influence from this generation. In this generation, they're born between 96 and 2010. So their ages are about 10 to 24. So it is the most diverse, the most educated, with college enrollment that's higher than millennials, the most ethnically diverse generation, the first, again, generation to be completely digital natives, with 80% that access news from their news apps, from their phones. 80% are accessing news from their phones, which is amazing to me, and 22% from podcasts. So they are very digitally connected. Those numbers in the Gen Z population are about 67 million. That's a tremendous number, almost 20%, over 20% of the population. And the buying power is currently at 143 billion and will continue to grow as this generation ages. So looking at that next generation is going to be critical. And I think that also understanding the values of this Gen Z population is encouraging to me. So there was a recent study released by CMC, and it showed that Gen Zs value freedom, equality, and healthcare. And that matters the most to Gen Zers. And 94% of Gen Zers are registering to vote, which is another change from past generations. They're very active in politics. And this multicultural majority sees themselves as the evolution, not as a revolution. And they are culturally fluent, which is very different than other generations. And so for any business to continue to grow and thrive, you have to start paying at multicultural, and you have to start paying attention to the next generation and how that generation is going to be impacting change and how we will address these consumers in the future. So I am optimistic about the changes that are happening now and how that will impact the future of the country and our industry.
I love, wrapping up a conversation on a moment of optimism. So, I'm not going to go for more because, I think you've summed up what's really important as we look forward to this year. And again, it leaves us in an optimistic space. I really want to thank you for taking the time and joining me on the pool. This is, one initial conversation, and I know it won't be the last that we'll have on these topics. So I really want to thank you for joining me.
Thank you again for having me. This is fun.
I want to thank Glenda Villanueva-Marchetta for joining me on the pool. The pool represents the richness of the advancingdiversity.org platform and embodies our mantra and our mandate from advocacy to activism. You can listen to episodes of the pool directly by going to advancingdiversity.org and wherever you find your podcast and audio offerings. Jump back in with us every other Monday for future episodes of the pool.